if you're in your 20s, lift weights, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, luckily I was always, I didn't have struggle with, um, weight gain and all this type of thing that many women do. I was always skinny, but guess what? It doesn't help because once you have babies, that skinniness goes down the, down the tube. You have to, and so weightlifting, I've realized in the last, you could say 15 years or 18 years is the way to go for your strength, for your overall health, your metabolism, for stronger bones. It's definitely the way to go. And the sooner you do it, um, muscle memory, the easier it is to build in your 20s and 30s, you know?
Welcome to the Love Atlas. I'm your host, Sunana Sharma, and today I have Kirshma. We're going to talk all about life and relationships, and she is an author of a book called From Ash to Ashes. We'll talk about, again, poetry because she has a passion for it, and grief and how to move through it. So, Kirshma, welcome. I would love to learn about you and how you got started on this journey.
Thanks, Sanana. So nice to finally talk to you face to face. And thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah. What exactly inspired you to write?
I've always enjoyed writing as a young girl, but I started writing my novel From Ash to Ashes um, right after my son passed away, and it was a way for me to channel the grief and the loss that I was experiencing. So that's why I started writing. And then later, I mean, I never intended it to become a book and then to get published or anything like that. It was just a creative way to express my emotions. Then later on, the book and the story and the plot sort of its own life and started to include other issues and things in our society and our community that I wanted to address.
Amazing. And then losing a child, again, that's like major level of grief. How did
Yeah.
you cope with it during that time? Because I do have few people in my life who are currently going through that as well.
Right. It was very hard. I was very young. I was only 24 years old at the time. And it was my first child, so I was just a new mom, just getting used to motherhood. And then the loss was sudden and unexpected. So therefore it really caught me off guard, and I wasn't expecting it because he wasn't sick or anything like that. Um, so one, the writing helped in terms of channeling my emotions, but it still wasn't enough. I needed more support, and it was hard because I was living in the UK in England at the time, so I was away from my family. Um, I felt very isolated and very alone, and I wish I was able to um, get the help that I got many years later. I wish I had gotten it sooner. But like you said, you have friends who are experiencing this now. My advice to them would be to not shy away from seeing a therapist or
Yeah.
some sort of social worker or counselor. It's very important to get professional feedback because oftentimes we look to family members and friends and they do feel for us and they want to support us, but honestly, they're not equipped to
Right.
because they don't know how and they don't know what's happening with the psychological aspect of loss.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that everyone grieves differently. So
Yeah. Yeah.
your spouse may not be grieving as you are, and then
Yeah.
that causes lots of miscommunication in your relationship. It causes resentment because you expect to be doing this the same way, but it's not at all. Um,
Yeah. And then that's such a good point because I'm thinking to myself, we have to kind of watch the way we talk to communicate with someone who we are close to versus when it comes to a professional support, you can speak your mind and not have to feel as if someone close to you is judging you or you might lose a friendship or
yeah.
it's just so much easier to be able to share your mind wholeheartedly without feeling like you can't share something, or where you're like, oh my goodness, am I oversharing at the moment?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One is the trust issue. When you're going through grief, you don't know who to trust and who to
Mhm.
talk to.
Yeah,
And because our community can be very judgmental,
yeah,
they have their own ideas about how long you should be grieving.
yeah,
In my case, it was expected that, okay, now this has happened, but you're still very young and you need to move on. And the best way to move on is to have another child. So there was a
right.
lot of pressure to
Yeah,
keep having more kids. And the truth is, like as any mother or father who knows, that one child never replaces the other.
yeah,
That's not how it is. That's not how
yeah,
it works. So people can go ahead and tell you that,
yeah.
thinking that it might make you feel better, but it doesn't actually help you heal.
Right, right. That's such a good point. I never thought about it like that as well. Again, I'm not a mom,
Mhm.
but like I can understand and connect because I have, as I mentioned, friends going through something
Yeah.
similar. So how did your relationship with your partner? I know you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
communication.
Mhm.
When you go through such a tragedy, you're going through a lot
Yeah.
personally, especially as a woman, right?
Yeah.
Because you're the one who birthed the child. So
Yeah.
like during those tough times, what have you learned?
Right. So what I learned was that expectation is a real killer of a relationship.
Mm,
Sometimes, especially in this case, when you expect your partner to A, grieve the way you are grieving,
yeah.
or B, comfort you the way you expect to be comforted,
Mm,
you're just going to always fall short. Because the truth is, what you don't see at that time, because you're blinded so much by your own grief, you
yeah.
don't realize that your partner is also suffering and in
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
And it may be a male female thing where,
Yeah.
men are suffering silently.
Hmm.
So their way of dealing with it is to not talk about it, is
Right.
to try to, quote unquote, move on as quickly as possible and
Yeah.
divert their attention with work, their job, etc.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas as women, that we don't want to do that. We want
Yeah.
to cry. We
Yeah.
want to talk about it. We want to
Yeah.
sit there and watch, our baby's videos and pictures and memories. And we
Yeah.
kind of need that, and for someone to tell us that you need to move on and you need to stop crying, it's
Mhm.
actually more hurtful and painful. And this is where men and women, and often in relationships, the miscommunication comes and the
Yeah.
resentment comes. But
Right.
only in hindsight, now looking back, I mean, we're talking about 21, almost 21 years ago. That's how old my son would have been today
Wow.
if he were alive.
Yeah.
So in hindsight, what I've learned and how I've grown in our relationship from this is to understand that it wasn't someone trying to shut me down. It was just the way he was also dealing with his grief, and it was different.
Right. Right.
And so any resentment that I may have harbored, I've let it go, and I've forgiven it because I realized that we were both young, we were both suffering, we were both in pain, and it
Yeah.
was wrong for me to think that, you know, he wasn't there for me because he was.
Yeah.
The truth is that I
Right.
just couldn't see it.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point because I think like sometimes we get so caught up with what we are feeling that we
Yes.
forget and we expect the other person to be there because we put all this pressure. What we're taught is like, you're my significant other, you're the love of my life, you should fix
Yeah.
everything, right?
Yeah,
But at the
exactly.
same time, as you mentioned with men and women, we process things differently as well. Women want to cry it out, whereas men, they like to keep sometimes things bottled up because they're supposed to be the macho, strong man who
Exactly.
household. So it's just like they're going through their own thing as well, and it hurts just as much, but they just don't know how to, I guess, cope with it. And women just want to share and talk about it.
Exactly, exactly. So in a way, I think there's always that feeling that if she's breaking down, then I need to keep it all together, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
to balance it
exactly.
out.
That's very true. Well, let's talk a little bit about your book, From Ash to Ashes.
Mhm.
I know you mentioned through this tragedy that you went through, you decided to start writing, and then you weren't sure if you would be an author, and then all of a sudden, it
Yeah.
worked for you, and that's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the book. Does it, is it a little bit about your life?
So yeah, I mean, all my friends, the people who know me, when they read, they were like, "Oh my God, is this you? You know, the main character? Did this happen to you? We know this happened." So yes and no. Like, there's a lot of projection of my own emotions that I was feeling. That's why it's such a tearjerker, because you can tell this person is not faking it. These emotions are real. They're authentic because they were.
Yeah,
However, the plot, that is not all true. That's where your fictional, part of the book comes into play.
right.
And like I said, when I first started writing, it was really a psychological projection of pain and suffering. So I sort of created a family that was experiencing loss. And basically, I wanted it to be anybody else but me who was feeling what I was feeling and who was
Yeah,
experiencing what we were experiencing. So it was a way of taking it off of myself and putting it onto someone else. And
wow.
then I started, and for years I wrote this story. I mean, it didn't happen overnight, because I did have more children. I went back to school for a master's in education. I was teaching full time for so many years. So on and off, I was writing the book, because as a busy working career mom,
Yeah.
there's not that much time to sit down and write a novel. So whenever I would have the chance, I would take time to write it, and then I would stop. Sometimes I'd stop for a year. And
Wow.
then yeah, so you'd see that progression, because remember, I started writing the story when I was 24. I
Hmm.
didn't actually finish it till I was almost 40. And I
Wow.
didn't find a publisher till I was 41.
Mm.
So, what I realized when I was editing and going back into the story with the developmental editor at the publishing house, well, she said there's like three women writing this story. And you sort of see how the girl who was 24, who started the story, grows up at the end of the story and becomes this woman, you
Wow.
know? And
That's
and so
touching.
yeah, thank you. So I decided that's actually true, that I started writing this book as a girl. And
Yeah.
now I'm a grown woman. And so you see that progression in the main character too. Um,
Wow.
story. Mhm.
That's amazing. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Oh, thank you.
And
I'd love that.
where can people find your book?
So my book is available on Amazon online, and it's also available on barnesandnoble.com and bookshop.org.
Okay, cool. I go to Barnes and Noble quite often, so I'll definitely look for it.
Great.
Um, and then as far as I know, you mentioned you started writing it when you were 24, when you
Mhm.
experienced this loss. Did you always had that feeling of wanting to be an author even prior to that? Like, did you want to write a book even prior to that, but it took this situation to be like, okay, you know what, I'm writing this.
Actually, I loved writing, and I would do some freelance writing in terms of poetry, in terms of writing articles. And I did write for a community magazine. I also was a philosophy major at NYU in college, and so I would write philosophical articles, philosophical articles about religion, about spirituality, about belief system, things like that. So when I started writing, it was natural for me to write, but never had I imagined that I'd be writing a book until it
Yeah,
sort of became a book, and
yeah.
it became a halfway story. And what's interesting is I never showed anyone for the first 8 years of writing it, like
Want to
before.
talk to you about that.
Yeah.
I would like to talk to you about that. It's because the reason why, since you brought that up, friends and I were talking the other day, and some friends like to share, like, oh, this is
Yeah.
what we're doing. And we
Yeah.
were talking about how then that task or that project just doesn't get accomplished because you're sharing, versus
Mhm.
there are certain people who just get it done by
Yeah.
themselves behind closed doors, and then they show the full project of completion. What do you think about that?
Well, I know there's a lot of people who believe in Nuzzer or the evil
Yeah,
eye, or if you speak
yeah,
too soon, it won't happen.
yeah, yeah.
I not 100% a full believer in that. Some things yes, some things no.
Yes.
But in this case, the reason why I hadn't shown anyone in 8 years, I hadn't even shown my husband. Like when
Wow.
I say no one, I mean no one. And the reason was because it was so vulnerable. It was my soul in that
Yeah.
story. And
Wow.
I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to share it with anyone. It
Mm,
wasn't really meant to be for anyone else. It was meant for me. It
right.
was for me to heal. It was for
Yeah.
me to organize my thoughts and emotions and put it on paper. And
Mm,
that's the way I did it. And then finally, my husband, he pushed and pushed me. He's like, okay, I don't know what you're writing, but I gotta see it. And I'm like, oh, I'm writing a story. I'm writing a story. Well, I want
yeah.
to read your story. And then finally, one day I had the courage to give him the story. I printed it out literally and gave it to him. And I hadn't finished. It was only a little more than halfway done.
Yeah.
And then he read it. It took him almost 3 days to read it. And he kept stopping and interrupting, like, and getting flustered and upset. And I'm like, oh my God, I guess you don't like it. He's like, but why would you do this to the character? And why would you do that? And I
Yeah.
was like, wow, like you're really getting emotional. And like, are you getting angry? And then at the end, I thought he hated it. But then when he finished it, he was like, this is good. He's like, I
Oh,
love it. And he's like, you need to finish it. You need to
wow.
finish it. Like and make it a book and people will read it. And I was like,
Yeah.
seriously, you think it's good enough? Like people will read it, someone will publish it.
Yeah.
And he was the one who gave me the encouragement to do it.
Incredible. That's amazing. Having that support system is huge. And
Yeah. Mhm.
that, yeah, I'm really happy to hear that. Through this entire journey, as you mentioned, writing is a form of self-love for you. Were there any other rituals that you adapted?
Mhm. Well, I also wrote poetry at the time. So poetry, I guess, is, another a style of writing other than the novel that I wrote. I've been writing poetry since I was like 10 years old, 10, 11 years old.
Okay.
But other than that, working out, fitness was always something that I have done. And it's just the release of endorphins, um, and that release of that stress that you're constantly carrying was a healthy way for me to deal with everything that I was going through. The second thing was forcing myself to go out, in
Yeah.
public. Like,
Yeah.
don't be at home by yourself. Meet
Hmm.
friends, meet family, do things, even if you feel half-heartedly, that you're doing it half-heartedly, like you're going to the movies or you're going to someone's dinner, it's like you almost have to fake it till you make it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Force yourself to do it because going the other way is a downward spiral
Hmm.
and you want to avoid that. I mean, you obviously don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're so uncomfortable, but you do want to break that barrier that will first be there right after a loss. Because anytime you go out, people will ask you, and
Yeah.
people will say, "I'm so sorry," and then people will constantly bring up, but exactly what happened and what, and then you want to then. The only danger with going out is you'll have to relive that story again and again, and
Yeah.
that is what really drains you and upsets
Mhm.
you. So you want to avoid that. So you can just simply say, I don't want to talk about it because it upsets me,
Yeah.
but I want to thank you for your concern and, and so thanks, for your, condolences and everything. But then,
Yeah.
and then that's it. And then the next time people see you, it's not going to come up again, again and
Right.
again.
Right.
You kind of have to like break through that. And that's why a lot of people who experience loss, they don't want to deal with people. They don't want to deal with public situations because they're afraid that people are going to come up to them and say, why, how are you feeling, what's happened, what
Um,
you gotta set up boundaries, you
yeah.
gotta overcome that, and then you do have to live because at the end of the day, you have this life to live whether you want to
Right.
or not,
That's, yeah.
um and that's a part of learning to grow up
Yeah.
is
I think as for me, sometimes I have a difficulty with the opposite where I feel like, oh, this is what they went through. They went
Mhm.
through this loss. so I shouldn't be the
Bring
person
it up.
bringing it up. If
Yeah.
anything, I want to make them like happy and talk about other things. So I'll start
Yeah.
talking about like, random like things about working out or hiking and stuff like that. And I think that's because that's also kind of like allowing them space to open up if they want to. If they want
Yes.
to share something, then I'll be there. But at the same time, like I'm not going to like keep questioning them because that's something that they're going through on a day-to-day basis at home with their partner, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's very, considerate of you. And something else that you just said about hiking made me think of one more thing that I always did was go out in nature. Nature is the most calming and most grounding thing that you can do for yourself.
Yeah.
Walking outside, sitting outside, all weather depending, but whatever you can do outside if you like to hiking with friends, I did that with girlfriends. That was always great because, a great place to talk, a great place to share. And while you're working out and you're,
Right.
releasing those good, feel good
Yeah.
endorphins and then, or just a gentle walk or just go outside, either with your partner or with your kids. And if they're riding bikes, you ride bikes with them or whatever it is, just going out in the sunshine, all very important to healing and
Yeah.
feeling good.
I agree with that. And I think hiking is one of my favorites where I'm like, you're getting to share your emotions with your friend,
Yeah.
talk about deep conversations, and then you're
Yeah.
getting to be in nature. You're also getting your steps in. You're getting,
Yeah.
it's like an all-in-one. You're healing
Yeah.
yourself. And every time I've hiked afterwards, it's just the best feeling to carry on with your day. Or
Yeah.
any workout you do. It's like you're a regret, you're kind of frustrated and you're like, do I want to go? Do I want to get out of my sweatpants? And then when you're out, it's the best feeling ever.
It
Having
is.
friends. Growing up, I remember my parents would always say, you don't need a lot of friends, right?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends. And especially at this point in my life, being 35, I have um, a big group of friendships, and incredible women. I have nothing like off to say about any of them. And but then you talk to two people, on a daily basis or, once a week and things like
Yeah.
that. But
Mhm.
but whenever I do have get-togethers, I have this like large group. So I feel like, do you have anything to say about smaller circle versus bigger circle? What do you think?
Well, I'm a person, I value quality over quantity, most definitely. But I also have a lot of friends. But I feel like friends are in different categories. I mean, I
Exactly.
have hundreds of acquaintances,
Yeah.
and then I have, you could say, a huge bunch of friends or good friends. And
Yeah.
then I have a few close friends,
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then, there comes a point in your life where like your best friend is also like your mother or your husband, your
Yeah.
sister,
Yeah.
maybe your one college friend you can like discuss certain things with that you can't discuss necessarily with your really good community friends, you
Yeah, yeah,
know? Yeah.
absolutely. And I think at a certain point, you do also attract the right people. I
Yes.
think recently, through podcasting and just meeting new people, it's been amazing for me. And just like-minded, like no animosity, negative energy. Like
Yeah.
back in the days, it was very different for me, like in my 20s versus now, it's like, oh my goodness, I have so many cool people around me.
Yeah. Oh,
It's
definitely.
hard.
I agree. I
Yeah,
agree. I have met with this whole like, rise of social media and Instagram stuff. I've met so many wonderful people
yeah,
online on social media who I could say like we're friends,
yeah,
and
yeah,
a couple of them like we have like for Dr. Monica, for instance, like we've even
mhm,
talked on the phone and
yeah.
we've even talked about like one day I hope we get to meet in person,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and a couple of women I've met, who've been in New York. Someone came, a couple of women who, one is an author, came from the UK for her book and she was doing something and we met for lunch. And
yeah,
so it's so nice to make these international connections
yeah,
with people from across the world who are in different different ages, different circumstances in life, doing different things, but you share this common bond. And
Mhm.
what I love is like at this point, like we have no tolerance for like nonsense, no nonsense drama, no competing with each other,
Yeah, yeah.
no putting each other down or back talk. Like, but no one needs that kind of negative vibes, We're all about like uplifting each other, helping each other, supporting one another.
I love that. And I would say last but not the least, if you had one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it
Um,
be?
oh, wow, I have a lot of advice to my younger self.
Top three.
Yeah, let me narrow that down. How about listen to your parents? Yeah. um,
Your kids
yeah,
your kids should see this one.
yeah, I know, but they won't until they're grown up. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
You have to learn from your own mistakes. I mean, there are some things, you wish you sort of had done or you listened to. But yeah, definitely that. And I mean, yes, sometimes you imagine things. I was a bit of a dreamer. I still am a very idealistic person, but I wish I had been a little bit more practical.
Mhm.
And in terms of career choices and all, and things like that. Um, and secondly, something maybe on a lighter note, I'd probably say if you're in your 20s, lift weights, lift weights, you know?
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because like I mean, luckily I was always I didn't have struggle with um, weight gain and all this type of thing that many women do. I was always skinny, but guess what? It doesn't help because once you have babies, that skinniness goes down the down the tube. You have to, and so weightlifting, I've realized in the last, you could say, 15 years or 18 years is the way to go for your strength, for your overall health, your metabolism, for stronger bones. It's definitely the way to go. And the sooner you do it, um, muscle memory, the easier it is to build in your 20s and 30s.
I
Um,
needed to hear that because I
yeah.
think one thing I tend to ignore a bit, cardio just comes very naturally to me. I'm like, I
Yeah.
can hike 10 miles, but when it comes to lifting weights, I just, like I get like a little, like it's a little, it's like working a new muscle. So
Yeah.
I'm not used to it because I haven't done it throughout my life. So it's like,
Yeah.
do it like once a week, but I think that's something that I absolutely want to add to my
Yeah,
plan as well.
definitely should. In my 20s, I assumed, and I'm talking about my 20s was like 20 years ago too. So I assumed that, and women did at the time, that we had to do cardio only because if we did weights, we'll get these big bulky muscles
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
won't
yeah,
look
yeah.
feminine. So we
Yeah.
did cardio. So we were like essentially, what do you call like we were just skinny. We
Skinny.
weren't
Yeah.
strong,
Strong.
and that was it's such a big loss because I wish we had known more and
Yeah.
made it better,
Yeah.
because that's not the truth at all of lifting
I think
weights.
that's one of my worries. After having kids, I've seen, like people's like body transform and like,
Yeah.
especially women sharing that with me as well. Like, oh, like I don't look the same as I did before. And,
Yes.
so I think that's like, is there a way, like you mentioned, like weightlifting,
Yes.
is that a great way to like still look similar to before you had babies?
Well, one thing I also learned after my first child was you don't really need to gain 60 pounds when you're pregnant, and don't let anyone push you into eating like keyed Brontes every day. Not a smart idea. Kind of wish I knew that the first time. Would have really helped.
Yeah, yeah. Like, oh, two people are eating, so yibi kalo, yibi kalo.
Exactly. Or like way too skinny. Like you're camping like 5 months pregnant. Like you need to eat more, eat until you like become a balloon, and then you
Yeah,
realize, oh my God, how am I supposed to lose all this weight?
yeah,
And then not only that, but all the other terrible stuff, stretch marks and all this that you could avoid
yeah.
if you only gained 25 pounds as a pregnant
Right.
woman. And then later on I got smarter, and So I started weight training during my pregnancies to start
Oh,
eating healthier, stuff like
okay.
that. So,
Okay. That's
yeah.
really interesting that you're mentioning all of this because I'll look into it as well and share with my friends.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you can weight train while
Oh,
being
yeah.
pregnant.
Yeah, I used to train with a trainer twice a week with my younger daughter. I mean, given that everything is healthy and that you're clear to do so,
Yeah.
there were two. So I have four kids. So
You look like you're in your 30s and
thank
like,
you.
you have kids? Wow.
Thank you. Well, actually, I've had five kids if you count my
Yes.
first
Yes.
son, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the latter four, out of all those pregnancies, two of them I was not allowed to work out at all. I had lots of complications. It wasn't easy. But the other two, I was working full time. I was working out full time. And then I used to train with a trainer twice a week while I was pregnant. So they understand that, there's some certain things you can't do, and there's certain things you shouldn't do, which are
Right.
dangerous, but within a safe limit, you're absolutely, yes, able to walk, train, eat healthy.
Mhm.
So yeah, and take care of yourself as much as you can during your pregnancy.
That's really
Because
good advice, and I'm looking forward to posting and creating reels and, spreading the awareness. I just wanted to
yeah.
say thank you so much for sharing your journey.
Oh, thank you so
Amazing conversation, learned about so many new things.
thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah.